My name is Samantha Mitchell, and for most of my life, 34 years, to be exact, I was invisible in my own family. They didn't hate me. They didn't hurt me. They just overlooked me. I was the quiet one, the steady, reliable daughter, the one who didn't cause problems and didn't deserve much praise either. That praise? It was always saved for my sister Emily. Emily was the golden child. Loud, funny, charming. She lit up every room she walked into. Her C grades turning into B's were cause for celebration. Meanwhile, my straight A's? Barely mentioned. A nod, maybe a faint. Good job. Then silence. When I got into Princeton's pre-med program, my parents didn't even tell my aunts and uncles. But when Emily volunteered at a local clinic for 2 weekends, they brought it up at every family dinner. It was like that my whole life. I wasn't bitter. Not at first. I just worked harder, studied longer, dreamed bigger. At 7 years old, I knew I wanted to become a doctor, after watching my grandfather survive heart surgery. I remember sitting in the waiting room with a children's anatomy book, mesmerized by the human body. By the time I was 28, I had published 2 research papers, completed my residency, and was offered a surgical fellowship most people wait years for. Still, silence, no congratulations, no calls. No, we're proud of you. But I kept building brick by brick, until one day it happened. Massachusetts General called. They offered me the position of chief of surgery, one of the youngest in their history. And I didn't tell my family, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed their approval. Then, weeks later, fate stepped in. Emily was rushed to the ER at Massachusetts General. Pregnancy complications. Urgent care. My hospital. I walked into her room in my professional attire, calm, poised, and my parents didn't even look up. They assumed I was just visiting. Just the other daughter. And that's when the nurse walked in, looked at me, and said the words that would change everything. The air in Emily's hospital room was heavy, sterile, quiet, uncomfortable. She was pale, exhausted, IV in her arm. My parents hovered by her bedside, whispering reassurances like she was the only person in the room. They barely glanced at me when I stepped in. Not a hug. Not a "thank you for coming." Just an awkward, dismissive nod from my father. "Hi, Sam," he mumbled. "You didn't have to come all this way." I didn't correct him. I didn't tell him I was already here. That this hospital, this floor, this department, it was mine. Then the nurse walked in, clipboard in hand, confident. She glanced at Emily, then turned to me with a smile and said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Dr. Mitchell, Chief of Surgery, we've prepped OR2 and the attending team is ready, just waiting on your go." The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear the heartbeat monitor beep. My mother blinked. My father turned, slowly. Emily's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Chief of what?" my mom finally whispered. The nurse paused, confused, then looked back at me. "Chief of Surgery. Dr. Mitchell oversees all emergency operations and trauma procedures on this floor. She'll approve the team for Emily's case if necessary." I turned toward them, still calm, still collected. I wasn't just visiting. I was on call. I'm the one who signed off on her initial scans. Emily looked like she'd seen a ghost. "You work here?" "I lead here." The look in my father's eyes, a mix of confusion, shame, and disbelief, was something I'll never forget. For years, I had waited for this moment. To be seen. To be acknowledged. But now that it was here, I didn't need their validation anymore, because I wasn't just the daughter in the background. I was the woman holding the clipboard and the power. After the nurse left, the room sat in thick, stunned silence. Emily looked like she was trying to catch up as if her brain was buffering. My parents? They wore a kind of tight, forced smile I hadn't seen since childhood. The one they used when pretending everything was fine at church after an argument in the car. "Chief of surgery," my dad said slowly, trying to sound impressed. That's really something, Sam." I nodded once. "Yes, it is." My mom reached for my hand. Her touch felt unfamiliar. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked softly. We didn't know you'd gotten that far." I almost laughed. Not out of humor, but out of disbelief. "You didn't ask," I said gently. It wasn't bitter, just honest. For years, I had tried to share my world with them, my research, my papers, my passion. And every time, I'd been brushed off for Emily's latest dating drama or B- report card. Emily finally spoke. "So you've been working here this whole time? In this hospital?" 2 years, I replied. "Got the promotion 6 months ago." She looked down, fiddling with the IV line. "I didn't know. I guess I just thought you were still doing research stuff. Even now, even after everything." She couldn't bring herself to say the words. "I was wrong about you. But I didn't need her to. I wasn't here for that. I was here because a patient, regardless of family ties, needed care, and because I took an oath. One they never saw me take, never praised, but one I lived by every day." My dad cleared his throat. "We're proud of you, Sam. Really." I looked at him. No anger, no sarcasm, just calm clarity. "Thanks, but I didn't become chief of surgery to make anyone proud. I did it because I earned it." And they finally didn't argue. For once in their lives, they had no choice but to listen. I was just about to leave the hospital room. Rounds were starting soon, and I had actual patients to attend to. Emily was stable now. Her vitals were fine. The OB team had things under control. As I turned toward the door, I heard her voice, softer than before. "Sam, wait." I paused. She looked nervous, fragile in a way I hadn't seen her before. Not the attention-seeking, dramatic Emily I grew up with, but someone very human, very tired. "Are you coming for Thanksgiving?" The question hit harder than I expected. I blinked. "Thanksgiving?" She gave a weak smile. "Yeah. Mom's hosting like always. Everyone's gonna be there. I think you should come this year." I hadn't been home for the holidays in nearly 7 years. The last time, I spent the entire dinner listening to my uncle joke about how some girls become doctors because they're too boring for real life. Everyone laughed. No one defended me. So I stopped coming. "Why now?" I asked, my voice calm. Emily looked away. "Because I didn't realize how much I've ignored. How much you've done. How much I took for granted. I thought I was the only one doing anything that mattered." That honesty surprised me. But what surprised me more? I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel the need to rub my title in anyone's face. I didn't feel the weight of needing to prove myself. I just felt free. Still, I hesitated. "I'll think about it," I said honestly. "But if I do come, it won't be to prove anything. It'll be because I want to, not because I need to be seen." Emily nodded. I get that. And for the first time in forever, I believed her. Maybe we weren't sisters who shared everything growing up. But maybe, just maybe, we could start now. As I stepped out of Emily's hospital room, the door clicked shut behind me with a soft finality, not the kind that ends something, but the kind that allows something new to begin. I walked slowly down the hallway I knew so well. The white floors, the hum of machines, the distant beeping. This was my world. Not a performance, not a mask I wore to impress anyone. It was where I belonged. I paused for a moment by the window at the end of the corridor, watching the Boston skyline stretch beyond the glass. My reflection was faint, but steady. Strong. Collected. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to rehearse a conversation in my head. Didn't feel the need to plan comebacks or wonder what more I could have said to finally earn their respect, because I didn't need it anymore. What I needed, I already had: purpose, peace, self-worth. My phone buzzed. A message from one of the new residents. "Dr. Mitchell, we're rounding early. Should we prep the trauma wing?" I smiled. "Be there in 5. I slid my phone away and started walking. Years ago, a moment like this, finally being seen by my family, would have consumed me. I would have gone home and played it over and over, aching for their validation, for a single "we're proud of you." But today I had my own pride. The kind that isn't loud, that doesn't need clapping or cheering or social media posts. It's the quiet kind. The kind that wakes up early, puts on scrubs, and leads a team that saves lives. The kind that builds its own foundation without needing applause from the audience. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was the woman who walked out of that room with her head high and her heart finally light. When I returned to the surgical wing, it didn't take long before word had spread. Doctors are like any close-knit team. Rumors move fast. And apparently, a nurse had already whispered, "Did you know Dr. Mitchell's sister was a patient on 3 East?" By the time I reached the staff room, 2 of the residents looked up from their coffee and gave me a half smile. Dr. Patel, always the bold one, raised an eyebrow. "So, you're that kind of Mitchell?" I blinked. "What kind is that?" He chuckled. "The kind with a family that had no idea their daughter runs this hospital floor." There it was. Said out loud. Dr. Lin, the youngest on my team, looked up carefully. Was it weird? I paused, then smiled. It was overdue. They laughed, but not unkindly. We sat down, and the conversation drifted back to medicine. Complex cases, a tricky gallbladder removal scheduled for the afternoon, a difficult consult in neuro. But underneath the clinical talk was something else. Respect. Genuine. Unforced. No favoritism. No condescension. Just respect. When I finished a chart note later that afternoon, I stood by the window again, the same one I passed earlier, and watched the city move. And I realized something. I had spent years trying to earn recognition from people who never cared to understand who I was. But here, in this hospital, among blood, stress, adrenaline, and teamwork, I had found my people, the ones who saw me not as the other daughter, but as Dr. Mitchell, a leader, a teacher, a surgeon, a human being. That day, I stopped chasing my family's love, because I already had something better, a family I had chosen, a family that chose me back, not because they had to, but because they truly saw me. That evening, after rounds and a late consult, I finally slipped into my office to breathe. The hallway lights were dim, the bustle had slowed, and for the first time all day, it was just me and the quiet hum of the hospital at night. I checked my phone out of habit. One new message. From Mom. I stared at the name for a full minute before opening it. "Hi, Sam. I know you're probably busy, but I was wondering, would you want to have dinner with me sometime this week? Just the 2 of us. No expectations. Just to talk." I blinked, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. No guilt. No backhanded praise, just a quiet invitation. For a second, my fingers hovered over the screen. Then another message came in. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day at the hospital. I realized I don't know you, not really. I'd like to start trying, if you'll let me." That stopped me. My mother, the same woman who used to dismiss my science fair ribbons, who once said, "Emily just shines more naturally," who had never once asked how residency felt, was now asking to start over. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just sat with it, because that text wasn't an apology. Not exactly, but it was something far more rare in our family. Acknowledgement. And that was a beginning. I typed out a reply. Slowly, carefully. "Okay. Dinner. Just us." Then I hit send. Not because I needed a mother, but because I was curious what kind of woman she might become. Now that she was finally seeing me not as a shadow, but as her daughter, we met at a quiet Italian restaurant tucked into a side street near Beacon Hill, the kind of place where the lighting is soft, the tables are small, and the noise never rises above gentle conversation. She was already there when I arrived, sitting upright, hands folded on her lap, glancing nervously at the menu. She looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in wear. In the way a woman carries decades of unspoken things on her shoulders. "Hi," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Hi," she echoed. "You look grown." I smiled softly. "I am." For a few minutes, we just talked about safe things. The food, the weather, her new garden project, how good the bread was. Then she put her fork down and looked at me. Really looked at me. "Samantha," she said, "I want to start by saying, I didn't realize how far apart we drifted until that day at the hospital. I didn't say anything, and I didn't mean for it to be that way. But I know, I didn't see you. I didn't ask. I was so busy worrying about Emily, about her struggles, that I assumed you didn't need me. That landed harder than I expected, because part of me, the child version, had screamed for her to notice, and now, decades later, she finally did. You were always the one who didn't cry, didn't complain. I thought that meant you were okay." "I wasn't," I said quietly, "but I learned to be." She nodded, eyes glistening, but no tears fell. "I don't want to rewrite the past," she said. "I just want to know who you are now, if you'll let me." And that, somehow, felt more honest than any apology could. I looked at her across the candlelit table. "Then ask me," and she did. For the first time in our lives, she asked, and she listened. Over pasta and soft jazz, I started talking. Not in anger, not in a rush, just sharing. "There were nights in med school," I began, "when I'd walk home at 2 a.m. after a 12-hour shift, soaked from the rain, hands aching from stitching cuts and holding hearts still. And I'd wonder, would you have cared if I collapsed right there on the sidewalk?" She didn't respond, so I kept going. "The first time I lost a patient, I sat alone in a supply closet for an hour, shaking. And I almost called you." "Why didn't you?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Because I didn't think you'd answer." She looked down. "When I got that fellowship, the one in New York, I waited for days for someone to say, 'We're proud of you.' Even Emily texted, 'Cool.' That was it." "I'm sorry," she said. "I was so focused on putting out fires with Emily that I didn't see the one burning in you." "I didn't need rescuing," I said gently. "I just needed someone to notice I was trying." And in that moment, she did. Not just with words, but with silence. The good kind. The kind that says, "I'm listening. I'm here." Then she said something I'll never forget. "You raised yourself, didn't you?" I nodded. "But I don't regret who I became," I added, "because I had to fight for it. And maybe that's what made me strong." She reached across the table, slowly, unsure, and I let her hand rest over mine. "I'd like to get to know the woman you are now," she said, not out of guilt, but out of choice. And that was all I'd ever wanted. Not a mother to fix the past. Just someone willing to show up in the present. We walked out of the restaurant into the crisp evening air. Boston always felt colder at night, but for the first time, I didn't feel the chill. Maybe it was the conversation. Maybe it was something else. My mother paused at the curb while we waited for her rideshare. She turned to me, hesitant. "This doesn't fix everything, I know." I nodded. "It doesn't have to." She looked relieved, like I'd just lifted a weight she'd been dragging behind her for years. "I was afraid you'd never speak to me again after the hospital." I smiled gently. "I didn't speak to you that day for you. I did it because it was my job. I'm chief of surgery, and Emily was a patient. That came first." She nodded. "But today? That was for us?" "Yes. If there's going to be an us, it has to start with honesty, not expectations." The car pulled up. She opened the door, then paused. "Thanksgiving's still happening," she said. "Emily will be there. I'm making your favorite lemon garlic chicken, Not turkey if you still hate it. I chuckled. I still do. She smiled and stepped in. We'll set a place for you, just in case. And then she was gone. I stood there for a long moment, watching the car disappear down the street. I didn't know if I'd go. I didn't know what kind of family we'd ever truly become. But I did know this. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by their recognition. I was no longer the forgotten daughter, the quiet achiever, the shadow behind the spotlight. I was the woman who made her own way, and who decided on her own terms whether to forgive. And maybe, just maybe I could, not because they earned it, but because I had grown enough to give it freely. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't always come wrapped in apologies. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a dinner invitation, and an extra seat at the table.